It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, a deepening post office IT scandal, and it's not about the Horizon system. Sky News has learned that a number of convictions relating to the capture system, the software used before Horizon, are now being examined as potential miscarriages of justice. We've been speaking to the family of a woman who died before her case could be looked at again.
When she came home, she was a different woman. So we felt we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it amongst ourselves. As a family, we didn't talk about it with the extended family. Our extended family don't know.
Coming up, I'll speak to another former sub-postmaster convicted of theft and false accounting while using that capture system, whose case is now being re-examined. Also tonight, police searching for the body of a woman murdered by her husband 12 years ago find human remains in North Yorkshire. Rania Alayed disappeared back in 2013, with her husband convicted of killing her the following year. The remains, which officers strongly suspect are those of Rania, were found by the A19 in Thirsk yesterday. Plus, BP backtrack, the oil and gas giants slashing green investment and ramping up fossil fuel production. On the same day, government climate advisors tell the public to buy electric cars, heat pumps and eat less meat. And a family's joy as the bench, dedicated to their father and believed to be lost at sea, it washes up 80 miles away. Oh, that's come and much more on the UK Tonight. It's been more than 12 months since Mr Bates versus the Post Office shone a light on the Horizon IT scandal, in which hundreds of former sub-postmasters were wrongfully convicted of false accounting, many of them going to prison, some of them dying before their names were cleared. But now there's a deepening scandal relating to the software the Post Office used before Horizon. It was called Capture, and Sky News has learned that the number of convictions linked to the system now being investigated for potential miscarriages of justice has soared. Sky's Adele Robinson has been speaking to the family of a woman convicted of stealing from the Post Office, whose case is now being looked at again.
I think deep down we were ashamed.
A secret kept for 26 years.
I get very emotional about it because of what she went through.
One Pat Owen took to her grave.
Because of the post office, dying at 62 years old, heart failure, broken heart.
Her family speaking for the first time about Pat's 1998 conviction for stealing from the post office.
And then when she came home, she was a different woman. So we felt we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it amongst ourselves. As a family, we didn't talk about it with the extended family. Our extended family don't know.
She was so confident, she knew she didn't do nothing wrong. And when the guilty verdict came out, she actually fell to her knees in the dock, crying her eyes out, shaking.
Sky News has learned the number of so-called capture convictions, like Pat's, now being investigated for miscarriages of justice, have more than doubled. All part of a post office scandal predating the infamous Horizon, which saw hundreds wrongfully convicted.
So this is all her paperwork.
But Pat's case is significant and could help turn the tide on convictions like hers.
That's the court documents, so everything's in there as well.
Like other sub-postmasters in the 90s, Pat used capture software we now know was likely to cause accounting errors. And in these documents, something new, evidence about the computer never heard before.
The problem on the computer is a faulty motherboard. This would have produced calculation errors and may have been responsible for discrepancies.
It's a description of malfunctions in the software from a computer expert who never turned up to Pat's court case in 1998.
The computer was sitting there on the week of the court case and was never used.
So I heard, now I can't remember who from, that he done work for the post office. If he turned up to be a witness in court for us, he wouldn't get any more work from the post office.
Despite best efforts, the expert's never been tracked down and the post office declined to comment. But victims' lawyer Neil Hudgell says any new evidence like this could possibly help other capture cases.
It's a real case of what if is Patricia Owen's case. You know, as their family, if you sat in their shoes and thinking about, well, if that expert had been able to give evidence, what could the outcome have been? How could life have been the last 30 years? So I say it's something that we've got a bit of a focus on particularly because, again, whilst it's relevant there, it may also be relevant in other cases.
These victims are the oldest in the post office scandal, and it could be months or years before convictions are overturned.
I would give everything to have her back tomorrow.
And for her to see her name being called.
Yeah. Just to see that everyone knows that she didn't do what they said she did.
Speedy justice for this family, more important than ever.
Are you worried that this could take years?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll probably be dead. But I hope I'm not. I hope I'm still here to see her name cleared, you know?
Yeah, that's what we want.
Yeah.
Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Well, I'm joined now on the programme by former sub-postmaster Steve Marston. And Steve, Pat Owen's story will be only too familiar to you because you also believe that you were wrongly convicted of theft and false accounting because of this capture software. Perhaps you could tell us some of your story.
Yes, certainly, and thank you for having me on your programme. I'd just like to say that story that we've just watched, the video, is absolutely horrific. But unfortunately, it's sort of in keeping with so many other stories. As far as my own story is concerned, I was pressurised into getting capture software at the threat of the post office being closed down. Prior to that, I'd over 20 years running the post office without any issues. I started having masses of problems pretty much on a weekly basis. I thought I could handle it. I was worried about actually showing losses. I just assumed that it was me, and I ended up putting money into the accounts to make things balance up. But when I run out of savings, I just dug a bigger hole for myself. And when I got audited, they found that it was £79,000 under. That's what they told me anyway, because I wasn't actually present when the audit took place, which is strictly against post office rules and regulations, but they wouldn't allow me to watch the audit as it took place. I was then taken out of my house and shop, put into their car even. They wouldn't allow me to drive my own car back to Blackpool. They dropped me off outside the house. I told them at the time that I hadn't had a penny. They said, well, you must have paid out a lot of extra, sold a lot of extra stamps or paid out a lot of extra pensions. I told them that I was worried about the software. And they said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the software, the computer. It's purely down to you, mate. So from there, I was suspended, although I never received a letter of suspension or, come to that, a letter of termination. I was never allowed back into the property again, even though it was full of our own personal possessions in the house part of the building. My wife was briefly allowed into the post office side, the shop side, to collect some shop stock, but she wasn't even allowed into the private side of the house. I mean, it still contained furniture, TVs, videos, beds, personal possessions, you name it, it was there.
You were treated like a criminal, Steve, because to all intents and purposes, that's what they were saying you were. And this, you know, we've talked about this so much now in the public domain. This is a familiar pattern. Your story at the time, I'm sure you thought you were alone, but over the last few years, actually, Mr. Bates and the Post Office, the TV drama, shone a light on it and brought it to greater public attention. But you now know that you're not alone. And I know that you're meeting other capture victims tomorrow. How are you feeling? Because this is the part of the Post Office scandal that hasn't been talked about until now.
No, you're quite right. I mean, I'm happy that we've managed to prove that the software was faulty and that the Kroll report mirrored our findings. The government then decided that it was the case to answer that compensation should be paid. But the problem with all of this is the timescale.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I mean, I was 67 when I started this last January. I'm 69 now. How much longer are we expected to wait? I mean, I think all of this should be fast-tracked. At the
Because,
end
of
of
course,
the day,
this predates Horizon. And,
yes.
you know, As you've said before, the only difference between what happened with Capture and Horizon is the software. What every victim went through is pretty much the same. Criminal convictions, bankruptcy, loss of business, homes, friends, family, and the stigma that you've lived with. Just talk to us about the shadow this has cast over your life, Steve. Because it's hard to compensate for that.
No, I mean, it doesn't matter what they do in that respect. Nothing will compensate for what's happened. It's not just about me. My wife suffered terribly. The kids suffered tremendously. I mean, even to this day, our daughter in particular, she struggles massively. The bankruptcy that followed because they illegally withheld the remuneration, my salary. We lost our new house in Blackpool. Went bankrupt. We literally ended up in a poky little flat in Blackpool, sleeping on the floor. We couldn't walk down the streets because my face was literally plastered all over billboards, talking about sub-postmaster stealing money and all this sort of stuff. It's just horrific. It's just absolutely horrific. Unless you've been through it, you can't really explain it. It's just there.
Yeah, Steve, it's hard to even quantify what you've been through in monetary terms. And I know that so many of the victims I speak to, particularly with the Horizon IT scandal, it's not necessarily about recompense for many people. It's too late for that. Their lives have been ruined, but it's about accountability. And that's the really difficult thing. If people think getting the money is hard, the accountability is the really difficult one. How confident are you?
I'd be very surprised if anything happens in that respect. They're talking about Horizon, the people responsible for that. They're probably looking at 2026, if I remember right, before anything actually happens. So I really don't know what's going to happen as far as the people that caused this issue with Capture. I do hope and pray that they do get their true deserts, the just deserts, because it's not right. So many people have suffered, so many people have died without even knowing or having their name cleared. Somebody has to be held accountable, but I'm not too sure if it'll ever happen.
Well, listen, Steve, thank you so much for talking to us on the UK Tonight. Steve Marston there, former Post Office submaster, believes that he is a victim of that failed IT system, Capture. Listen, you're meeting up with other victims tomorrow, pushing this forward, and we wish you all the best, and I'm sure we will speak again soon, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me on your channel. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Now, police investigating the honour killing of a woman back in 2013 have found human remains in North Yorkshire. Rania Alayad was murdered almost 12 years ago by her husband, Ahmed Al-Khatib, who was jailed for life. Today, police revealed that they have found human remains buried by the A19 in Thirsk. We understand that they were discovered yesterday. Emma Birchley is here with the details about what police have released information-wise so far.
So, as you said, Rania Alayad disappeared in 2013, in June of 2013, and a year later, her husband was jailed for murder. But the fact was, a body had never been found. There had been multiple searches over the years. The family had been told, you can only imagine what they would have gone through each time, and then no discovery was made. But this time, police said that they received further information, so they went back to an area where they'd searched before. So this is the A19 in Thirsk, and then yesterday, the discovery of human remains was made. No confirmation yet of the body's identity, but they feel confident enough in that they've spoken to the family. Just to go back a little bit and give you a bit of the background to this. The couple had met when Rania was just 15 years old. She was born in Syria. They'd come to the UK. They'd had 3 children. But it was an incredibly violent relationship, and she'd left Ahmed Al-Khatib and was making a life for herself. The court heard she'd become quite westernised, and he didn't like that. He lured her to a flat in Salford, and then, as we know now, he murdered her. So a truly horrific story, and so hard for the family. Now, now that the discovery has been made, there has been a statement from her son, Yazan, on behalf of the family. This is what it says. At last, being able to provide a final resting place is all we've wanted for the last 11 years. To have the ability to lay down a few flowers for my mother is more than I can ask for from this world. So you can tell just how important this is for them. So finally, some answers. And as for Al-Khatib, when he was sentenced back in 2014, it was for 20 years. So he's still got a lot of time, or minimum of 20 years. So he's got a lot of time in jail yet.
OK. Emma, thank you. Emma Birchie there with the update on that story. Now, on the same day, government climate advisors said that greenhouse gas emissions need to fall by 87% in the next 15 years. Fossil fuel giant BP announced a huge cut in its investment in renewable energy. The firm's chief executive saying the company went too far, too fast in its green energy transition and will now be ramping up oil and gas production. Here's our business correspondent, Paul Kelso, with more.
The whole energy system has to be transformed. And
in 2020, BP made a surprising promise. The oil company would produce less oil.
We're heading to net zero, and there is no turning back.
It was a big bet on a rapid energy transition intended to ensure as fossil fuel use waned, BP had renewables to replace them. But 5 years on, the world has changed, and so's the chief executive. Under enormous shareholder pressure, he's changed course.
COVID, the war in Ukraine, a recession, and the shift in attitudes of markets and governments have a fundamental impact on the energy system. Our optimism for a fast transition was misplaced, and we went too far, too fast.
BP had pledged to cut oil production by 40% from 2.6 million barrels a day in 2019 to 1.5 million by 2030. That was increased to 2 million barrels a day 2 years ago. Now its target is 2.5 million, almost back to where it started. Meanwhile, it will cut spending on renewable energies by 75%. BP has been under pressure since the Deepwater Horizon rig exploded in 2010, the largest oil spill in US history, costing £60 billion in fines and compensation.
National energy.
But with Donald Trump in the White House,
drill, baby, drill.
It has some political cover.
BP's turn away from the energy transition reflects the current reality that renewables are both more expensive and less profitable than fossil fuels. And increasing the return to shareholders in the short term could be good news for British investors who have BP shares in their pension funds. But as the government's own climate advisors have warned, delaying the transition comes at a price too.
This is a very, very short-term approach. They are taking a short-term share price boost at the expense of their long-term viability, because we know that the shift to renewables is where the future economy lies.
BP promised! BP lied!
BP's share price fell following the announcement. Giving up fossil fuels may be easier for consumers than for oil companies. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
While BP steps back from the green transition, government advisors have been outlining the way households must help if the UK is to fulfil its move to net zero. The Climate Change Committee saying that the UK must cut emissions by 87% in the next 15 years, with a third of those cuts coming from households. Electric cars and heat pumps are the main changes that they want people to make, as well as eating less meat and dairy and flying less. Here's our science and technology editor, Tom Clark.
Having the heat sucked out of your home watched by a thermal imaging camera.
I don't think you'd appreciate how much of a draft there is from there. Wow.
Reveals the drafts and cold spots that, multiplied across tens of millions of properties, represent the next front line in tackling climate change. Maria's house in Bristol, like pretty much all the rest in Britain, will need a bit of work before they can ditch their gas boiler for a greener, more efficient heat pump and see it save money in the long run.
I think in terms of, financing it, yeah, there'd need to be some kind of support, because it's, I don't have, spare capital to put into just sort of, funding this outright.
The difference between the top and the bottom of the chart on here is...
It's why the latest report from the Committee on Climate Change is its most consequential yet. Few of us noticed the 50% cut in emissions achieved so far, made by phasing out coal and increasing wind and solar power. But cutting the remaining 50% falls largely in and around our homes. By the late 2030s, heat is important. Warming our homes with zero-carbon electricity is the single most important step to getting to net zero. But the electrifying pace will have to increase both in our homes and beyond. The 2.8% share of electric cars on the road must rise to 80% by 2040. Average household meat consumption should decline by 25%. Demand for flying increases 10% by 2040 compared to today. The cost of lower carbon jet fuels either going onto tickets or funded through a frequent flyer tax. And all that demand will require 6 times more electricity from offshore wind. But, says the climate watchdog, it will have to get cheaper quickly. Consumers simply won't switch unless it makes life better.
It's not asking you to be colder, not to drive, not to take your holiday. It's saying we expect business and government to work to make these better, modern technologies available to you. And also that means that we help the planet.
Their new advice shows how consumers and the wider economy will benefit from the rapid shift away from fossil fuels mandated by law. But it's a cash-strapped government that must work out how to afford the fixes needed to deliver it. Tom Clark, Sky News, Bristol.
So some real mixed messaging today. You'd be forgiven for wondering why you're being asked to make drastic, expensive changes to your lifestyle on the same day that BP stripped its green commitments back. Let's bring in Nama Chowdhury from the 350.org Climate Action Group. Thank you for joining us tonight. What's your reaction to what's been going on today?
Well, in reaction, I have to say I found myself struggling not to roll my eyes because, as Emma said, there is, and as you just said, there is such a strong contrast between what's being asked of individuals and what rich companies like BP are doing. This is essentially reckless, greedy, and frankly short-sighted. So that's in brief our response. But it's hard not to think about BP in pejorative terms. The fossil fuel party has been coming to an end for a while now, and BP is frankly behaving right now like an irresponsible guest who insists on ordering an obscenely expensive bottle of wine without stopping to think, is this really what's needed right now? Who can afford to consume it?
If the party's coming to an end, why are they concentrating more on it? Because from what I can gather, green just isn't as profitable as oil and gas. So there's still people willing to go to the oil and gas party.
That's patently untrue in the sense that the green economy has grown 3 times as fast as the wider economy in 2024 alone. So it's not true that the green economy isn't keeping pace. It is the investments that are needed for sure. As Emma Pinchbeck was just saying, it's important for the government to start making investments to make those technologies more accessible. We cannot be relying on individuals to be making the big capital investments that are needed. We cannot be shifting only on individual behavior change and relying on that to save the planet. We need a mix of both systemic change as well as individual behavior change.
BP saying they went too far too fast. Is there a credible theory that in order to go forwards further, you have to go back a few steps?
Not at all. This isn't quite the waltz. You do need to be stepping ahead at a pace that the world requires. 350.org is named for the safe limit of carbon in the atmosphere. That's 350 parts per million. Right now, we are at well over 425. Even a single step backwards increases that level to unsafe levels. It's important for us to recognize the moment that we're in and to do what the future demands of us.
I'm just wondering what people at home will be thinking tonight, because people do care about the planet, they care about their environment, they care about the future of their children and grandchildren. But it does feel like they're being asked to make the sacrifices. And in the grand scheme of things, people watching at home are thinking, what kind of dent can I make by using a reusable cup, eating less fish and meat, if BP are still going to carry on as normal? Do you think that this will have a negative impact on people's buy-in to the green economy and green initiatives?
Well, it is frustrating to think that they're leaving the change required to individuals. And yes, I can empathize with people whose energy bills are out of control. I can understand why people would, resist change when it comes to individual change. It won't happen magically, the changes that are required. We do need those investments. We do need the super wealthy, both individual and corporations, to be held accountable, to pay their share, to pay their fair share, to power the future that we want. It is really important for us to be to think about it in a bit more equitable terms. You're quite right. People shouldn't be feeling and carrying the burden when big companies are allowed to get away with these backtracking and backsliding of their commitments.
Also, Nama, I want to go back to something you said about the green economy, saying that it's growing 3 times faster than the wider economy last year. They're the latest figures from the CBI. I've got them here in front of me. But, with the green economy growing, consumers don't feel that they're benefiting. Yes, renewable energy, innovation, job creation, there is that benefit. But for people watching at home, having to make those small sacrifices, they don't really feel like they're benefiting from the green economy. They feel like what they're benefiting from is the wider economy.
Well, that's because we are continuing to fuel that addiction, which is what it is. We continue to insist to, fuel our homes, to not set up the infrastructure for the electric vehicles that Emma Pinchbeck was talking about. Until those changes are made at a systemic level, it is going to feel harder for individuals. It is going to be harder for homes to make these changes. Hence my stressing that it's important that we see the systemic change made at a far faster pace than we see individual behaviors change. It shouldn't be left to people like you and me.
Yeah. It's hard, isn't it, to sort of see the long term when in the short term your energy bills are going up, you're being asked to fork out for expensive electric cars, heat pumps. It's a real conundrum for people at home watching. They feel like they're doing
But Sarah, it wouldn't do, right? If we were to make the investments in renewable energy technologies and community-driven ones, and we are seeing smart investors who are already putting energy into several community energy projects.
The innovation's there, isn't it? The innovation's there, it just needs the backing.
The innovation is there, the technology is there, the market is ready. Everything is pointing in that future. So just because there are these powerful interests that are insisting we stay locked into the fossil fuel economy.
OK, Nama, really interesting to talk to you. Nama Chowdhury there, Head of Public Engagement at 350.org, the Climate Action Group. Really good to get your thoughts tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Still to come here on the programme. 7 companies named and shamed by the Grenfell inquiry are to face investigation. Also coming up, tributes to the former Going for Gold host, Henry Kelly. He's died at the age of 78. Plus, how a family were reunited with a very special bench after it had been swept out to sea.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Connor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Connor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death.
Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
So why not just say you failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news.
It's over, isn't it? The Americans say he is, Rossi, a fraudster. This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country. A dangerous murderer. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Innes after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News. The full story first.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Hello, welcome back. 7 organisations are to be investigated in connection to the 2017 Grenfell Tower fire, which claimed the lives of 72 people. The firms could face a ban from public contracts after they were criticised in the inquiry into the disaster. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has accepted all 58 of the recommendations in that report, including the creation of a single regulator for the construction industry. Well, Sky's Rachel Venables has been following developments in this story for us today, and she is in West London outside the Grenfell Tower for us tonight. Rachel, when that inquiry came out, we were both there, and the reaction of so many families and campaigners was good. Companies have been named and shamed in this report because this is about accountability. It's worth reflecting on who these companies are and what happens next.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, a huge number of institutions, public and private, were named and shamed in that inquiry report, which was published by Sir Martin Moore-Bick after 7 long years of work, just under 6 months ago. Of course, the government, successive governments actually over many years, were criticised for successive failings, for failing to acknowledge and to act on information that it had about the dangers of combustible materials on high-rise buildings. We also know the fire brigade were criticised for not having sufficient policies or plans in place or training to deal with high-rise blazes, such as we saw, of course, on the night of the 14th of June 2017. But also a number of companies, cladding manufacturers and insulation manufacturers, were also accused of systemic dishonesty by Sir Martin Moore-Bick and really criticised for the way they tested and then marketed their products, and those flammable products, as I said already, which led to that tragedy nearly 8 years ago now and the deaths of 72 people. And so amongst other things today in the House of Commons, Angela Rayner talked about 7 companies being investigated, and if sufficient issues are found, they could be disbarred effectively in the future, banned from certain public contracts. The details of this and the timing we don't yet know, but we do know which 7 companies these are, and this is a little of what Angela Rayner had to say about some of them in the House of Commons earlier.
The manufacturing companies, including Arcanic, Kingspan and Celotex, whose products were used to refurbish the tower, the report found that they acted with systemic dishonesty and they missold and they marketed them. Their disgraceful mercenary behaviour put profit before people and exploited the regulatory regime to evade accountability with fatal consequences.
And Rachel, what's the reaction been like from the families today?
Well, I think there's been a real focus on the fact that the government today was also responding to the recommendations. You'll remember there were 58 recommendations from Sir Martin Moore-Bick to a range of individuals and groups, but the government received a large proportion of them. And they said today that they would accept in full 49 of the 58 recommendations, with the remaining 9, they said, they were accepted in principle, but they needed to go away and consider them more and have further consultation. And that's something which has really bothered some Grenfell campaigners and survivor groups and those who lost loved ones, of course, nearly 8 years ago, because many of them are stopping and saying, well, it has been nearly 8 years. How can things still be up for debate and discussion, particularly when 6 months ago Sir Martin Morbick put forward so many recommendations? One of them, for example, involved the creation of a single body to regulate the construction industry. That's something that the government accepted today, but they stopped short of allowing it to have more powers over the certification of combustion, of products that would go on buildings or construction materials. And that's something that Edward Defan, a survivor of Grenfell Tower and a campaigner with Grenfell United, was really disappointed at. Also, we know it could take several years for some of these policies to be enacted. And again, he's just saying this is just taking far too long for people to get meaningful change.
8 years after Grenfell, no criminal charges. A response to a report that was published 6 months ago. My overriding feeling is this kind of carousel of delay, the fact that we are going to have to wait maybe 3 or 4 more years before anything meaningful comes out of the recommendations of Sir Martin Morbick's report. And however well-intentioned it is, it just feels like a very long time.
But there is much still that people are happy with today, including a new duty of candour law, a new Hillsborough law that's been announced, recommendations. They've accepted the appointment of a chief construction advisor as well as others. And we also heard about a construction products green paper, a reform green paper that's published today, gone out for consultation. So many people saying this is moving in the right direction. But the question of how long it's taking again and again seems to be the thing that most Grenfell survivors and campaigners here are really concerned about.
Rachel, thank you. Rachel Venables there for us in West London tonight. Thank you. Henry Kelly, the former Going for Gold presenter, has died at the age of 78. His family say Henry passed away peacefully after a period of ill health. Born in Dublin, the writer and broadcaster began his career at the Irish Times before presenting the TV game show in the 1980s. He also hosted ITV entertainment programme Game for a Laugh. Still to come here on the UK Tonight. Calls for people living with motor neurone disease to have longer to decide whether to end their own lives if the assisted dying bill becomes law. The assisted dying bill continued its journey through Parliament this week, and one of the main areas for debate is eligibility. Campaigners say those with neurodegenerative illnesses can suffer cognitive decline towards the end of their lives, meaning they could become ineligible for an assisted death. Earlier this week, I was joined in the studio by Andrew and Melissa Davies. Andrew was diagnosed with motor neuron disease last year.
It was May last year when I first had some symptoms, which is like a wobbly ankle, unstable ankle, which I just didn't put down to anything. Just thought it was one of those things. In June, I began to get fasciculations, which is like muscle, sort of like ripples of muscle around the body. If you put that into Google, it comes up with motor neuron disease. That's kind of top of the list. A sort of a limb weakness and fasciculations. So it kind of immediately got us worried about that. When we did have an appointment in October last year, the neurologist was very clear in Oxford. It is motor neuron disease. It's suddenly, you step out from that appointment and you see the multidisciplinary motor neuron disease team who talk about banking your voice, and suddenly you're plunged into a different world. And that smacks you very hard. But at that point, I was still able to go for a walk, you know, with my family, and I could sort of, so I was kind of affected, but it was not dramatically changing.
It's manageable.
It was manageable. And then what's happened is, it's almost like you follow a journey. I mean, on the one hand, you've been told that the quantity of the rest of your life is now limited. And now you're on this journey. And that journey it's a fluctuating one, but it tends to deteriorate in terms of the physical changes. And that has been weakness of my legs that has gradually increased, particularly in the last couple of months. So I was able to walk here, but it took some, it takes some doing now. I can walk around the house, but I can't go for a walk with the family. It's just like piece by piece, things you take for granted get taken away from you. And that is, so you get smacked by the diagnosis of motor neuron disease, but you don't fully, I know what it's like to this point in time. I don't know what it's like down the line, but I know that the path is not a good one. So,
all of this has happened in less than a year. It's been an intense 4 months since your diagnosis. And I would imagine, as a family, you've had lots of conversations about this. You've got 2 children, aged 14 and 12. And I know that will have been a difficult conversation to have with them. But it would have also made you think about assisted dying. This has been in the headlines. The assisted dying bill is up for discussion. It's coming back to the House of Commons in April. Where did you stand on assisted dying before your diagnosis, Andrew?
I kind of had thoughts that perhaps it is there for some people. You know, I perhaps always had that possibility. But it's something that I hadn't, to be honest, fine-tuned my thoughts as to exactly what are the factors to be thinking about.
How did your diagnosis bring it into focus? Where do you stand on it now?
It's one of those perhaps nuanced thoughts about it, but it does bring it into focus because when you look at the bleakness of the prognosis and you look at the loss of function, it throws into sort of like the meaning of life and what's it for and what's the quality of life. So it's moved into, I can see from a compassionate perspective why assisted dying would be, I think perhaps should be present and available for people.
Would you like it as an option for yourself?
I think as an option, this is not to say I'm going to do it, but it's as an option because I don't quite know what position I'll be in a few years' time. And I say a few years. I mean, it could be earlier than that, but and that's so. I think at a humane level, having the possibility of an organised genuinely ethical, moral approach to thinking about assisted dying, then I can see why the bill's been put forward.
Melissa, you disagree with your husband on this, and I'm sure many families, if they were forced as you are to sort of contemplate these kind of discussions, people never think they would have to talk about them in real terms, as a hypothetical theory may be, but in stark real terms, I mean, this bill will not be an option for your family, but it is something you've been discussing. And you disagree with Andrew because, you know, your start in life, you fled the war in Bosnia as a child, and it gave you a different perspective on the value of life. But you don't want this to be the first option for those.
Yes, I mean, just to say that, like, we're in 2025 right now, and we're 30 years away from our latest breakthrough development, which was Riluzole, which prolongs life by 3 months. 30 years on from there, to be in a position where this is another innovative option for us.
Where assisted dying is an option rather than a new drug or new research.
Absolutely. I mean, I selfishly would want Andrew for the rest of my life. I do understand maybe if I was in his position, I might think of it as being a good option. I do understand. But there is a luxury of life here, and whilst you have your life, especially motor neuron disease, sometimes, because Andrew has like limb onset, he will possibly go on to maintain his voice, possibly. We can't know for sure, but you've got to really make the most of that voice in your lifetime to make sure that this never happens again. And that we treat this cohort of patients and make that the last cohort that faces 100% death. I really strongly believe that. You know, we have a disease where death is inevitable. The average lifespan is 2 years. We need to change the conversation to research, and research now, for this cohort of patients, helping them now.
Well, Andrew and Melissa, thank you so much for coming in to tell your family's story. Important voices in this conversation, and I know that you're pushing for greater awareness of motor neuron disease and the desperate need for funding for research and those medical breakthroughs. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If I could just mention our petition.
Of course, Melissa.
Of change.org/M&D Journey 2025. We're marking 30 years since our last breakthrough. Let's make some more breakthroughs.
I've put a link to that petition on Twitter as well, at Sky Sarah-Jane. You can find it there. Thank you to Andrew and Melissa. Coming up on the UK Tonight, a huge shock for England's cricketers. They've been beaten by Afghanistan.
Trust in politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong, and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. You know, it takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, like, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel like just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the two-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello? No, yes, where is it? I said, found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it, let me see it. This is brilliant, brilliant.
You are on Sky News. Welcome to the BAFTAs.
I'm Katie Spencer, Sky's arts and entertainment correspondent. And from the BAFTAs to the Brit Awards, the Oscars to the Olivier's, our entertainment team is here interviewing some of the biggest stars in the world.
This is the story of the night. It's the little independent film that could.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We start with breaking news.
I am Anna Botting.
It's been quite some day.
The golden age of America begins right now.
A long-awaited ceasefire is now underway.
First question, Sky News.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
Describe this feeling. It's incredible.
Now to California.
The Democratic mayor of Los Angeles cut the fire department budget.
Do you owe citizens an apology? Have you nothing to say today?
Jane Secker, Sky News. Would you like to respond to us now?
I've never seen anything like this.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
In principle, would you agree to do that?
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today.
The cameras are poised here, there, everywhere, waiting to see what the president might do next.
I gave you the A+ treatment. Thank you. Thank you all.
Right, David is here with the sport. David, we're talking cricket. A big shock in Lahore. What went wrong for England?
Right, well, first of all, they are out of the ICC Champions Trophy after 2 games. They played 3 in the group stage. They're out after 2. They lost to Australia a few days ago, and here they are losing to Afghanistan by 8 runs. They were in control of this match on several different occasions. They had Afghanistan 37 for 3, but then I have to say, huge contribution from Ibrahim Zadran, 177 from 146 balls. It's the highest ever score in the Champions Trophy, highest ever for an Afghanistan batter in an ODI as well. Mark Wood had another injury issue. He hobbled off, came back on, didn't take a single wicket, and they conceded a lot in the final 9 overs. So Afghanistan 325 for 7. England in the run chase, well, you can see this is the final wicket falling. When Joe Root went, having made 120, they should have still got there. They needed 17 or 14, but they lost those last 3 wickets in the last. You can see Joe Root there, absolutely disconsolate. So England go out really with a whimper in this tournament.
And what does it say about the future of the captain, Jos Buttler?
Yeah, it's been a really miserable 18 months for Jos as captain of the ODI and T20 teams. Way away from the whole Owen Morgan reign. A third poor white ball tournament in a row that he suffered. 2023 50-over World Cup, 2024 T20 World Cup. Brendan McCullum took over as coach of this format in January, but it looks like Butler's time may well be done. He's asked, am I the problem? Am I maybe part of the solution? He's going to take some time to think about it. So cricket, obviously, a big headline today, but also lots of Premier League football going on this evening as well.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
I needed someone to look over my plans, so I went to a man who's got plenty of experience working behind the scenes in football.
What is it you think these mentors would bring? Do you think that's going to be a difficult role? Do you think the families or the players will want to hear it?
A lot of educational people coming out of college, coming out of university are going into the system. And I have nothing against that, but that leaves a massive void of experienced ex-professional players. If you look at Sir Alex Ferguson, Ancelotti, Guardiola, Harry Redknapp, they talk about the mentors in their life. Former players will understand the difficulties that these kids will find at the back end of their time in the academy.
So playing that back, people who've had experience of what it's like when you don't make it would be able to help people through that experience. I think that makes sense. What would the mentors encourage these kids to do?
The mentor can be, that little bit of glue between the football club.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Now, a family has been reunited with a bench that was swept out to sea and thought to be lost forever. The seat was dedicated to the memory of Bill Babcock. It was ripped from its base on Anglesey by Storm Darragh back in December. Earlier, I spoke to Bill's daughter, Helen Wharton.
The first I heard about it was on the 28th of January, and I was contacted through Facebook Messenger by a lady called Megan up in Cumbria. And she basically said that the bench had been found washed up on the beach. It was the back part of the bench with the plaque still on it. And she basically said, is that yours? And, would you like to claim it?
So she did some detective work to find you because you live in Warrington. Yes. The bench was in Anglesey, which was the holiday spot you went to with your dad and your family. and the storm swept it out into the Irish Sea. So that's quite the journey. And Helen, I understand that engraved on the bench was a line from a poem that was written by your dad, Bill, which reads, "For me, it has to be the sea."
Yeah, so it's actually a poem that my dad wrote for my mum. He did like to write poems, and he wrote quite a lot to my mum, especially on like anniversaries and things like that. And it was one of the favourite poems that he wrote. And because he specifically kind of wanted this bench on the headland up on Anglesey, my mum thought it was quite fitting to put the first line of that poem, which was, as you're right, that for me, it has to be the sea.
Did you and your mum have a bit of a chuckle about this?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's crazy, really. My dad, he did like the mountains, he liked the coast, he loved the sea, and he was always out walking, couldn't stop him, really. And the fact that he's kind of had one last adventure, we hope it's the last one anyway. It was quite surreal, but yeah, I've had a bit. I'm sure he'd have been laughing to find out as well himself.
You say one last adventure. Where are you going to put the bench now? Presumably you want to keep it safe so it doesn't go on another journey, particularly not up to Cumbria. It's quite a way.
Yeah, so he did have a shed at home in the garden. He was always tinkering if he wasn't out. He was tinkering his shed. He was always making stuff. And my mum actually had it all painted up in the summer last year. So it looks like a nice little summer house now at the minute. So I think the bench will be going there as a bit of a tribute to him, really.
Yeah. Oh, Helen Watley there remembering her dad, Bill. Time for a quick look at the weather. Spring is only a few days away, but we haven't said goodbye to the cold nights just yet. High pressure developing across southern parts of the UK will bring settled conditions for the foreseeable, with frosty nights and patchy fog. There'll be sunny spells and scattered showers to end the day. These will be heaviest and most persistent in the west. Some will merge into longer spells of rain, and there may be the odd rumble of thunder. As the evening progresses, inland showers will die away, but cloud and showery rain through central areas will spread south-east. Outbreaks of patchy rain will linger over eastern parts of Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, whilst cloud over East Anglia and the south-east will keep it milder there. That's it from the UK tonight. Up next, it is the world. Gillian Joseph in the hot seat for you tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. See you then.